Hello, hello. If you have been waiting for my October palette project report, this is your lucky day. Yes, we are a few days into November, but here we are to get a recap on how I did with my spooky palettes for October. Every month I pick a loose theme and I pick a number of palettes in my makeup collection to focus on for the majority of the looks for the month. October was spooky month, so I picked all my spooky palettes, or as many of my spooky-ish palettes that I had in my collection. I had quite the stack and I think I did pretty well. So let me just get the stack over here and very quickly tell you which were the palettes that were in the October palette project, and let's get started. If you've never seen one of my videos before, my name is Jo, and basically this is just an outlet for me to talk about my shenanigans with makeup and beauty so that my poor husband doesn't go crazy. Pardon my voice, I know that it doesn't sound the way that my voice normally sounds, but I'm getting over some sickness. I'm not really sure what it is. Basically, whatever is going around classrooms right now, I caught a version of it. I have a bunch of students that are still sick. My husband is sick. It's a whole mess, but I finally can function well enough to at least put my face in front of the camera and tell you how things went in the October project. Okay, that's enough talking, so let's get to it. Usually in these palette usage reports, what I do is that I start with my least used palette and go to the most, and then I introduce the theme for the following month with all the eyeshadow palettes that are part of it. So first, let's get to the October palette. Quick recap of the palettes that were included: ColourPop Blue Moon, Scooby-Doo Rah Raggy from Glamlite, Unearthly Sleepover palette, Unearthly Not Normal palette, first version, not the new remastered larger version, Unearthly Dead of Night. If you're noticing a strong indie theme, yes, that's yes. Nomad Haunted Europe, Nomad Ghost Town USA, coolest packaging ever, and Wicked Widow Beauty's Resurrection palette. Those were the palettes on the October stack. So let's go from least to most used. To no one's surprise, definitely not my surprise, my least used palette, there's actually a tie. With 2 uses, the ColourPop Blue Moon palette and the Glamlite Scooby-Doo Rah Raggy palette. I think that this is not a surprise because this is the color story of the Blue Moon palette. I mean, it is pretty monochromatic. I bought it in a moment when I didn't have any blue eyeshadows, and that's pretty much all you get here because this is what these 9-pan palettes from ColourPop are made for. I still like it a lot. I do notice that the formula is kind of dry, and I'm not sure that that's my preference, period. But if I want cool tone blues, this is a very reliable palette, and I did enjoy the 2 looks that I got out of it in October. And then with the Glamlite palette, again with 2 uses, it's kind of the same thing. This is very much a companion palette. Unless you are looking for these very specific color combinations that it has, it's not really a palette that can stand on its own, in my opinion. If you want to get more wearable looks out of this, you need to pull from other palettes. I did use the mattes the 2 times that I used them, and I have to say the formula is pretty solid, but I maintain that Glamlite excels at the shimmers. Glamlite excels at these shimmer metallic duochrome shades. Those are the best thing that Glamlite has in, my one palette experience. Obviously I can't speak for the entire Glamlite product line because this is my only Glamlite palette, but I did enjoy the 2 looks that I got out of the palette. Regardless of whether this is a companion palette or not, I'm never getting rid of it because it was a gift from my husband, but I do have it with the understanding that it is a companion palette, and because of that, it's probably going to get less use in my collection than other palettes. So these were the least used of the bunch with 2 uses. I'm not surprised, I'm not unhappy with it because the nature of the palette of both of these means that they are just not as practical as others. Then we have the next 3 palettes, all have 3 uses. So with 3 uses, first off, we have the Dead of Night palette by Unearthly Cosmetics. I was kind of surprised that I didn't use this more because I love it. I really do love this palette. I really like the color story, but I only used it 3 times. I did use the purples. I remember using this duochrome called Forest. And I did use the silvers as well for another look. If you want to see all the looks from October, you can always go to my Instagram at Joe Sparkly. I post all the looks that I do with my palette projects with swatches with the color combinations as well, so that hopefully that can give you ideas on how to combine colors in just a handful of eyeshadows. I rarely use more than 4 or 5 eyeshadows in a look. Average is 2 or 3 for every day. So it's a way for you to see like how to use maybe some of these more colorful palettes on the everyday, on the more simple side of things. But this is a great formula. I think that from all the Unearthly palettes that I have, this one has the best formula. I did get them in an exit sale because all 3 palettes that I have, all 4, sorry, were being reformulated at the time. So I got them at a pretty deep discount. This is a beautiful palette. If you like this color story, the duochromes are solid, and so are the mattes, but these are colors. This is a color story that's really specific. So if you want to really stretch it out, I would say the best way to do that is to go with monochromatic looks, or, you know, to bring in other neutrals to kind of stretch the shadows a little bit more. But I did use it 3 times. My next 3, sorry, I had a fly in the room. My next 3-time use palette, or 3-use palette for October, was the Sleepover palette from Unearthly. I'm starting to see kind of a pattern here that many of the palettes that I chose for this project were rather monochromatic palettes. That wasn't on purpose. I honestly looked more at the names of the palette and the theming of the palettes to choose them for October, not necessarily the color stories. So, interesting that I ended up with quite a few monochromatic palettes, or kind of in similar color families. Interesting, just interesting. I do remember using the Sleepover palette for my Breast Cancer Awareness Day look. I did an all pink look with this one. It is a very easy palette to use. The mattes do need a little bit of buildup, especially this one, the shade Beloved, which is kind of like that light Barbie pink. It does need buildup. I understand why this palette was pulled out to be reformulated, because the mattes, you know, they could use a little bit of work. You need to kind of build up a couple of layers to really get the color payoff that you see in the pan, but you can get beautiful looks out of this. And I absolutely love this black with pink sparkle, the shade Sleepover. This one is super fun to use as an eyeliner. If you want black eyeliner with a bit of a twist, since this has pink sparkles, this is a great shade to use. It's otherwise a matte black, but you know, those pink sparkles definitely give it a little something different, right? So that was really, really fun to use. And of course, shades like Satin and Laughter are really easy inner corner highlights. So that allowed me to dip into the palette a little bit more than for other looks. I actually think that I used most of the shades in the palette in the 3 looks that I did. So I'm really, really happy with that. I think this is a really easygoing pink palette. If you like pink eyeshadow, this is a really nice one to have. Some of the links that I put in the description box are affiliate links. The indie brand ones usually are not, but if this is available, I will link it directly to the Unearthly website, because it is a really nice pink palette. If you enjoy pink makeup, I really do, then you would enjoy this one a lot. And then my third palette with 3 uses is Nomad Haunted Europe. Really unexpected pleasure. This is a really cool color story. It's colorful, but it's not crazy intimidating. There's a lot of space for neutrals here. There's a lot of warm neutral combinations that you can do here, cool neutrals combinations. I mostly stayed within the neutrals in the palette. I used this brown, I used this one, I used this one, this one, this one, I used this shade called the Catacombs. I can't even explain what this shade is. It's like a green, like a dark green that shifts to gold. It's like an old coin that is covered with like a patina. I don't know how else to describe it. That's what this color reminds me of, which I guess that with the theming of the palette makes a lot of sense. This one's not super heavy like on the duochromes or anything like that, but it is a super cool color story, and I had a lot of fun playing with it. I was kind of surprised that I didn't use it more, but you'll see that there were just other palettes that captured my attention a lot more, but I can definitely see myself using this a lot. I think that it's a really practical palette. If you want a neutral palette with just a little bit of color that is not too scary, I think this is a good one to have. This one is on its last restock, so if you do want it, then the time to get it is now, because Nomad Cosmetics is not going to reissue this palette again. This one is on its retirement tour, so I've enjoyed it a lot, and the formula is solid. If you want to see swatches, there are swatches in my swatch shorts playlist here on YouTube. But yes, this was an unexpected surprise. I bought it kind of scared. I was like, ooh, this is really gonna be something I use. But yes, very much so. I actually kind of miss it. I wish that I had it in my palette project in November. Maybe it'll be a guest palette one weekend or something. But I really enjoyed using it. It's a beautiful palette. 4 uses on this next one. Unearthly Not Normal. Doesn't surprise me at all, because this is like a neutral palette with a warm twist, with green twist. If you take away the greens, it is pretty much a neutral palette. But the greens and this like lime green, kind of lime green yellow, gives it kind of a bit of a different twist, so that if you like kind of those like swampy colors, because that's how these translate on the lids, like swampy but make it fashion. I don't know how to explain it. If you do it that way, then yeah, this is a really practical palette. So I used it 4 times. Some of my most used shades: taupe, the taupe that isn't a taupe. I mean, when I think taupe the color. This is one of my most used shades in the palette, but I went in there. I used Emotions a couple of times. I even used Basic, which for me, really, it's a lid setting shade. It's just for me to kind of set my eyeshadow primer. This is gonna be my least used shade in the entire palette ever, because it's just really light for me. It's a lid setting shade, but even for my skin tone, it's just not quite close to my skin tone. This one would be better, like as a more close to my skin tone lid setting shade. But if you want a neutral palette that, you know, has a little bit of variety, you want a neutral palette that allows you to play, this is a great option, especially now that it's double the size and it has more shadows. So if you want to check this out, Unearthly has re-released this palette, but it is much larger now. It has more shades. I'm personally not interested in the re-release. I think this is more than enough, but this is always a palette that I enjoy. I really like the looks that I get out of it. They're very, you know, like the name of the palette says, they end up being kind of unconventional, but not crazy intimidating, if you know what I mean. So Unearthly Not Normal got 4 uses in October. Also with 4 uses, Ghost Town USA, this is just one of those palettes that every time you use it, it's wow. Some of my favorite looks in October came out of Ghost Town USA. Smoky Quartz, it's a lovely shade. Tombstone, super fun, has almost no base, so it's a really nice sheer one and done shadow. Copper Penny, amazing. Garnet Montana, fantastic. I can't speak highly enough of these like copper goldy shades. Rhyolite Nevada, wait, is this the one that has almost no base? This one is also pretty translucent, but it has a little bit more, it's more cool toned than Tombstone. So this is like the more golden version, and this is like a cooler tone version of a sheer out shade, kind of in the vein of Urban Decay Space Cowboy. That's what these 2 shades remind me of, because it's kind of that wet look shade that you can use by itself or as an eyeshadow topper with other looks. I also use Smoky Quartz, which is fantastic. Skinner's Saloon, great shade. Dead Man's Hand, also beautiful. I use most of the shades and the looks that I created. I have a few that I haven't used. I haven't gone into this green quadrant over here because I used other greens during the month, but this is quite possibly some of Nomad's best formulas. This palette was on like the top of eyeshadow palette rankings in 2023 for a lot of my favorite creators, either top 5, top 10, or top. So I strongly recommend, if you want primarily cool neutrals palette, like if you remove this, it actually reminds me a lot of the Sigma Cool Neutrals palette. I don't know if you see it, I definitely see it. So if you like cool tones, if you like kind of those neutral metallics, if you like, you know, deeper blues, but not exactly blue, like much darker, this could definitely be a good option for you. It's beautiful. I've enjoyed it a lot, and I'll definitely be using it beyond October. So Goes Down USA 4 uses. I think that if you're keeping count of the palettes that are in here, you already know which is the queen of the spooky palettes, a true workhorse palette. Wow, if there is a palette that has impressed me during the month of October on its versatility, color payoff, ease of use, just all of the things, it's the Resurrection palette from Wicked Widow Beauty. Wow, this is so good. I would call this a workhorse rainbow palette. So if you want one rainbow palette, this is all you need. This is all you need because it goes beyond being rainbow because it has a whole bunch of multichromes in here. So if you want fun and if you want a palette to play with, this is your girl. It is a pre-order palette and I totally get it because it has a whole bunch of multichromes and that's expensive. The palette itself is like $78. It's an investment for sure, but if you want one rainbow palette that has like a little bit of witchiness to it, that is not like entirely rainbow, I would say get this one. It is absolutely worth it. The shade that probably surprised me the most was actually Adorn Carvin. I used this shade as my lip color in Halloween. I put it on top of like a deeper purple lip shade to kind of give it a little bit of a shift, and that was so much fun. Let me just show you. I don't know if you'll be able to see the multichrome in it, but it goes like, it's mostly purple, but it does have green gold. It has a whole bunch of shades in it, okay? So in the screen, it's reading, oh, there's the fly. In the screen on camera, it's reading purple. I'm trying to move it so that you can see the shift, but when I switch it to my hand and I put it down, I'm seeing red, which is really cool, but it is probably one of the best shades in the entire palette. Highly, highly, highly recommend. I wish that Wicked Widow would release that shade, Adorn Carving, as a lip gloss, like as a sparkly lip gloss. I don't know if it's possible to make multichrome lip glosses. I have no idea how that works, but that shade, it was such a transformative thing to do. I loved it so much. My costume was Wednesday Addams, so I wanted to go, you know, a little bit different. But of course, again, this is a palette where basically every special shade has like a matte companion, which makes it really easy to use. And you know, you can kind of arrange things on a matrix. And I think that that was done on purpose. It seems to have been, which makes the palette very, very, very functional. You really don't need to dip out of this for another shade because you have this very light one that can be used as a lid setting shade. So it's just proven to be such a fun palette to play with. I just found myself gravitating back to it to do different things. And I mean, you want colorful, you get colorful. You want witchy, you get witchy. You want monochromatic, you can do monochromatic. You want one and done, the multichromes gave you one and done. It's quite possibly one of the most functional palettes that I have in my entire collection, and it's made me reconsider purchasing any other rainbow palettes. It is definitely the standard for rainbow palettes for me. This is what I'm looking for, or better. 6 uses in October for Wicked Widow Resurrection, and that makes it the winner of the whole palette stack. I mean, it's not really about winning, it's about using my makeup, but this is the one that got used the most by several uses. So I'm saying that that matters. She's the winner, she's amazing. Now, let's talk about guest palettes. So usually on the weekends or on random days, I allow myself a couple of guest palettes. This month we have one of my e.l.f. Duochrome Liquid Shadows. This one is in the shade Venus Envy. I did use this once. These liquid shadows are, it's kind of difficult to kind of categorize them in anything else, and they're the only liquid shadows that I own. So I used it once. I don't even remember why. I think I used it one of the days that I used the sleepover palette, but I don't remember at the moment. You can see on Instagram because the looks are posted there. And I mean, they don't have a whole lot of product. I bought them when they launched. So I am wondering a year later, when are these gonna dry down? So I'll bring them in as guest eyeshadows when I can in future palette projects and just get some use out of them. But I did use this one once. I had one in September, if you remember. If you didn't watch the September palette project recap, I'll put it up here so that you can watch it. And then the other one that I think that these palettes are going to be recurring guest palettes was one of my 5-pan palettes from Pat McGrath. This one is Bronze Bliss. And it's funny that I'm bringing this out. I also only used it once because when I look at this color story and I look at these shades, they reminded me of those new Patrick Ta eyeshadows that people are losing their minds over. Not because I think that these are necessarily better, but I personally think that if you have one of these 5-pan palettes, or if you have this one from Pat McGrath, I personally think that you don't need the Patrick Ta shadows. So there is one example. Lights are not helping me today, but that one is a shade. This shade is called Nude Moon. I mean, I'm sure that this is pretty close to one of the Patrick Ta shadows. If you want me to try to dupe the vibes with the Patrick Ta eyeshadows, I'm happy to do that. Let me know in the comments if you want to see among my sparkly shadows, which ones do I think are close-ish, so that if you have similar shades in your collection, you can go dig around. I'm thinking about it. I just don't know if I should. I really don't think that the reaction to the price is really that proportional. I mean, it's not like Charlotte Tilbury didn't do it last year and hers are $10 less only. And it's not like Chantecaille hasn't been selling $52 single eyeshadows for a while now. Like, why the selective outrage with Patrick Ta? I personally don't understand it, but that's for another video. Maybe. Anyways, La Vie Noire. I know for a fact that there's one of those eyeshadow duos that has a bronze kind of like this. I think it's the one called Still in the Club. It is kind of bronzy taupey. If you have something like this from Pat McGrath, you really don't need the Patrick Ta eyeshadows. By all means, if you have the money, buy it. Be happy, treat yourself. I know that they're out of stock at Sephora right now, I think, but they're still in stock on the Patrick Ta website. But my point is, Patrick Ta didn't invent sparkly eyeshadows. There are other brands that have done similar things before. Everybody just needs to calm down. If people can buy them, they can buy them. If people don't want to buy them, they don't have to buy them. But it's not like Patrick Ta is the first person to do a really expensive single eyeshadow or eyeshadow duo. I just didn't see the outrage last year with Charlotte Tilbury, and I've never seen the outrage with Chantecaille, for example, or Victoria Beckham, or Tom Ford. Like, can we please just calm down, okay? And enough with the selective outrage. Seriously, rant over. I use my Bronze Bliss 5-pan palette once. These little 5-pan palettes will be recurring guest palettes in these palette projects as we move along. I'm losing daylight, so I'm trying to figure out what's best to continue. Hopefully this is not too terribly dark, but in the next portion of the video, we're not gonna be swatching anything or anything like that. And then there was another guest palette that I took on my holiday to Thailand that got used 4 times because it was the only eyeshadow palette that I took, which was the Natasha Deanna Retro palette. Some of the looks got uploaded to Instagram. I'm not sure that all of them did, but I got this palette earlier this year. I got it like on a Valentine's Day sale on the Natasha Deanna website, and I picked it up in the summer when I went to the US, and I just hadn't had a chance to play with it that much. So I took it to Thailand as my only eyeshadow palette because it's pinky neutrals, man. This is about as easy for eyeshadow looks as you can get. So yeah, I took it and I basically did like 1, 2, 3 eyeshadow looks a couple of times, and that was it. But with this one, let's get into the November stack. And in November, we are going to spend the entire month with Miss Natasha Deanna. It's a Natasha November, y'all. That's what I'm calling it because I like wordplay, okay? It's a Natasha November. That's what we're doing. It's all my Natasha Deanna palettes. Okay, the retro uses in October, those don't count for Natasha November. First off, the only mini palette that I have from Natasha Deanna, which is the mini nude palette, and what an auspicious occasion because I hit pan, yes. what a great way to start a palette project than hitting pan. And it's great too because this palette, it's on its retirement tour. It's so busted. I can't take this with me when I move in June because I'm afraid that if I put it in a suitcase, no matter how much bubble wrap I put in it, it will explode everywhere. So it needs to be used as much as possible. So it is on deck for this month. Okay, palette number 2 is my oldest Natasha Deanna palette, which is Zendo. Zendo has 2 pans in it, and I am wearing it today, and I really tried to get that pan in Aura, but that pan is resisting me. It is not coming to me. So there will definitely be at least 1 or 2 uses that include Aura because that pan will be mine by the end of November. I'll make it so. Okay, but of course, Zendo, it's my oldest Natasha Deanna palette. I got it in the spring of 2021 when it launched, and I really love it. I think it's a perfect fall palette. Again, I'll refer you back to my video on why I think that Natasha Deanna should have launched that in the fall instead of the spring. Make your own conclusions. Palette number 3, Natasha Deanna My Dream Palette. I got this in my Beautylish Lucky Bag of 2022. I was kind of surprised to get it. I was like, oh. And it had been one of the Natasha palettes that I had my eye on because I think that this is like a pink neutral color story, but with a little bit more edge. I really do think that when Natasha Deanna says that this is her dream palette, she means it because this is very much like her style of makeup, even the makeup that she does on herself. I think that you can very much do it with this palette. I love all of these burgundies, these pinks. This is a duochrome. Is this the duochrome? Yes, it is. Vision. This is a duochrome. You're seeing a pink, I'm seeing a green. And then of course, like all the other shades here, they just make for really lovely looks. If you love pinks, purples, soft neutrals, romantic, mauvey shades, this is your girl. It's a beautiful, beautiful palette, and I'm very excited to use it as, you know, part of this focus this month. Next up, we have the retro palette. I already talked about it. Again, I think it's a softer version of the My Dream palette, but you know, a very practical palette and something that I definitely see a place for in my collection because I love these kinds of shades. I could wear these shades every day of the week, but there's also a little bit of gray here. There are kind of some grayish undertones, which I do pretty well with because I have quite a bit of blue and purple undertones. So those shades really suit me very, very well. Next up, we have the Love palette to conclude all the midi palettes. I personally think that this is kind of a very specific palette, but I really do love working with the silver here and some of the purples here, and the reds, of course, always bring a lot of fun to the looks. I really like this kind of more golden pink shade. I really like those shades as well. It's kind of my favorite warm neutral kind of shade to wear, golden pinks. And I mean, yes, it is kind of like a rather thematic eyeshadow palette, but I still think that it can be really, really versatile. I do have a dedicated video for this palette here on the channel. I actually did it for Valentine's Day this year. So if you want some look ideas, some inspiration on how to use the purples, the pinks, and the reds, I would recommend checking out that video. But always excited to use the Love palette. I actually have gotten more use out of it than I thought I would. And then we're gonna end with my 2 large palettes, which I think is kind of a species in extinction in the Natasha Deanna line. Metropolis, which is probably the most varied color story that I have here and will bring some really well-needed warm neutrals into the whole situation. Always excited to use Metropolis. I really think that this is Natasha at the peak of her powers. It's quite possibly, in my humble opinion, the best palette she has ever done. Yes, I said it. I think that this is the best palette she has ever done. Without having tried some of her new palettes and some of her new formulas, I think this is the best palette that Natasha Deanna has ever done. I think it's the most complete palette she has ever done. And I'm not a warm tones person, and this is primarily a warm tone palette, but you cannot beat the looks that you can get out of Metropolis. They are just spectacular, really, really spectacular. I cannot say enough good things about this palette. It's great. And last but not least, we have Biba. Again, I think that some of the palettes that she has released lately, I think are kind of meant to replace Biba. If I had to guess, I think that I Need a Nude is the cool version, or like the cooler extension of Biba, and I Need a Warm is the warmer extension of Biba. That's the way that I see it, so that kind of everyone can get their own more specific version depending on the tonalities that they like. But Biba, same thing. You cannot beat the looks out of this. I chose Biba as the palette that I would use if I were getting married today and doing my wedding makeup. If you want to see what that looked like, how I ended up putting together a similar look, to be honest, to what I actually wore on my wedding day, what I would do now based on what I know now about makeup and the formulas that I enjoy, check out that video. I also did that a little earlier this year in the channel, but it's a beautiful palette. It's a palette I often pull for special occasions, more glam looks, for performances. If I'm performing, I'll usually use this one. If I'm having like my picture taken, I'll usually use this one. But all of November is gonna be Natasha Deanna palettes only. And I think I have a lot to play with. If you want to join in on the fun, either because you think it's kind of cute that I went with N for Natasha and N for November, because I'm adorable. If you think this is a fun idea, I would love it if you tag me on your looks on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @JoeSparkly. And I would say maybe let's use hashtag Natasha November or Natasha Deanna November. For the record, nobody at Natasha Deanna Beauty knows who I am. I'm just trying to be creative and using a wordplay to pick up palettes following a theme rather loosely. That's about it. But if you want to join in on the fun and play Natasha November with one or more of your Natasha palettes, I would love to see your looks on Instagram. I especially want to see your looks if you have I Need a Nude, I Need a Dream, Yucca, or are those the three? Xenon. If you have any of those 4 palettes, I Need a Nude, I Need a Warm, Yucca, or Xenon, please tag me in your looks. Please, please, please tag me @JoeSparkly and use the hashtag Natasha November. I would love to see your looks because those are the 4 Natasha palettes that are like on my radar that I would love to own. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but those are the ones that are like most attractive to me from her current product lineup. So that's it for my October palette project recap, and that is my November stack. I'm super excited to spend the entire month playing with my Natasha Deanna palette because it is a superb eyeshadow formula, quite possibly my favorite eyeshadow formula in the entire market. So let me know if you choose palettes based on a theme for the month. If you have a palette stack that you're working with this month, let me know what you're thinking about for November. Lucky for me, also some of these are like rather warm shades that are very fall appropriate, like in Metropolis and in Biba and in Zendo, sorry. So you will see some of that like fall harvest kind of inspiration, right? But also of course, pink purples, mauves, rosy tones, because I have what I'm calling in my head the Natasha pink trifecta. Like these are all, this is a happy pink family, right? Pink purple family. So yeah, definitely I have my fair share of pinks and purples in Natasha formula to play around with. If you enjoyed this video and you think that this is at least a good idea to get you thinking about how to use your palettes in ways that make sense to you, please consider giving the video a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my makeup shenanigans, consider subscribing. I would actually love to get to 150 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm like 12 subscribers away. I just think it would be cool. I like nice rounded numbers, right? So if you haven't subscribed and you've been returning to see the videos, my analytics say so. Just go ahead and subscribe. So I hope that you can join me next time for more of my makeup shenanigans over here. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.